Welcome to week 5. Let's start with a real quick announcement. So my wife has her due date for our second child later this week, maybe beginning of next week. So I'm going to record next week's lecture, and it'll be recorded. And then there's a likelihood that the week after will just be a Zoom lecture. So apologies for that. But yeah, so hopefully that won't change anything. It shouldn't change anything material-wise. You just don't have to come next week, and there's a chance also the week after it will just be a Zoom recording. All right, so let's get started with today. And I'll announce that on Canvas, and I'll send an email reminder as well. So what are we going to do today? So we last week we put all Swift UI to the side for one lecture, and we built an app in UIKit. We started building the tip calculator there, and we did a lot of layout things. We saw how we can navigate to another screen, and we also talked about architecture a little bit. So we started talking about MVC. So again, MVC stands for Model View Control. And in UIKit, that is the framework, that's the architecture that we have to follow to get anything done. There's a view controller, there are views, and then I guess we could not follow the pattern and not create models, but it is highly suggested that in UIKit that's what we do. And I mentioned this last week as well. You can have something on top of MVC as well, so you can have more control over your architecture there. You can be more fine-grained, so we at least have to cover MVC in this course, just to make sure that you guys can find your way around UIKit. So we'll continue with this. We talked about communication patterns there. So certain modules could talk directly to others, and certain could not talk to each other at all. So we'll do a quick review there, then today we're gonna cover another communication pattern that's a little bit more complicated to understand. It's everywhere in UIKit. So if you want to create a list of things, this communication pattern shows up. If you want to have pages, this communication pattern shows up. And I'll just name it here. So we're gonna cover delegation. Apple used it a lot, creating their UI components. And so in Swift UI, it's not really that useful, but you can still use this pattern for other things talking to each other. So even though we're not going to use it in our UI layer anymore, it can be used in other situations. And why are you being weird? iPad is being confusing. Let's see what's going on. Not quite sure. Maybe. I think I put some sweat on there from my bike ride. There we go. Working again. Delegation we'll cover today. We'll first use a little example that doesn't involve code. And then we're going to continue with our tip calculator, the one that is in UIKit. And we're going to delegate a task to the second screen that we created, changing the tip, and then communicating back to our main tip calculator screen. So we'll use delegation for that. And so you'll see delegation a lot when views talk to view controllers, but you can also have sub-view controllers talk to their parent view controllers. And we'll cover that a little bit more in detail. So yeah, we'll cover delegation today with our own example. And then, so there's going to be lots of other places where we'll see delegation. So I'm going to apologize in advance. After today's lecture, it might seem this is a really complicated pattern. We'll try to work on that for sure, but then the more you become familiar with it, the more it just clicks. So yeah, I find it very interesting. There are not that many components, but somehow I think partially the language around those components make it so that it can sometimes be a little bit hard to wrap your head around this communication pattern. But yeah, so we'll see it today. There might be still some questions. You might not feel very comfortable with it yet, but we'll see it again in many other places. And so I hope we have a little bit of time after all of this to start talking about enums. Enums are, it's short for enumeration. Who's heard the word enumeration before in other contexts? So yeah, it exists in other languages. You probably have a thing in mind. So if you've worked with enumerations in other languages, so unless you've covered them in Swift or another language that uses these to this extent, you're going to be surprised. Even if you think you know enumerations, there's a lot here that I find really cool. And it's a really powerful thing to use in Swift. Right, so yeah, that's my plan for today. So let's maybe just really quick or any questions before we continue? Great, so let's just go over some of the components of MVC again, because so that we can hone in on a very specific place. So we have our three components. We have our controller up here, we have the view, and then we have the model. And so maybe you guys can guide me in adding some ways that these components can talk to each other. Which components cannot talk to each other at all directly? So which two of these cannot talk to each other? Yeah. So we haven't actually covered this section very much. So there is some communication happening, but you're right, we haven't covered it yet. I did mention a very particular, but yeah, so you're right. So far we have not seen them communicate. Any other place? Yeah. The model and the view, yes. So these two here, they cannot talk to each other. And then so we had borrowed from lines on the road, so a double solid, that one, a double solid line, what's going on here? A double solid line on the road means you can't cross, so that's often what you'd see in this kind of a diagram. And then, so yeah, if the view wants to let the model know that something is happening, and we haven't really seen models, so we've just theoretically talked about it. But yeah, so maybe you remember from last week, if the view wants to let the model know that something happened, how is this facilitated? So they can't talk to each other directly, so how would the view let the model know that something happened? So the view would let the controller know. And is there a way, is there anything fancy that needs to happen here when the view wants to talk to the controller? So we were talking about how the view, so that we can reuse our views, we have to be very careful with the communication direction from view to controller. So we'll cover that again. But yeah, so view talks to the controller, and then what does the controller do? Communicates with the model. Yeah, so the controller has both model and view properties. So the controller knows everything about the model and the view, can ask it questions, can tell it to do something. So yeah, so if we want to talk from the view, so if the view wants to communicate something to the model, we have to go to the controller first, and I'm using a dashed line because there's certain things we have to consider. And then the controller can talk directly to the model and say, hey, model, do this thing, maybe update this property here because someone clicked on a button and wants to set something to false. So model, I'm telling you this thing is now false. Do with it as you may.
Talking about how views can't know anything about the controller, so it can be reused.
Yes.
For other,
Yes. Yeah. Very good. Yeah. Yeah. So we haven't really talked about the other direction yet. But so if the model wants to talk back to the view, so let's say the user unselected a check mark, so something is now turned off. This causes maybe computation on some data in the model. So we now went through the controller to let the model know that this is now not true. The model did its thing. And so now we want to update the view with this new model state. So we would go in the reverse order, right? So the model would talk to the controller. And here, again, we have to be careful with how we're communicating back to it so that we can reuse our models in other places and that they are as separate as possible. And then, again, the controller can know everything about the view, so the controller now can talk directly to the view. We used, again, road painting, road markings for this. So a solid line with a dashed line next to it means you can go over from the dashed line, but you can't go over from the solid line. So we add this dashed line here. So yeah, the controller can unrestrictedly talk to the view and the model, and if the view wants to let the controller know something, or the model wants to let the controller know something, we have to do something special. So for view to controller communication, we already talked about a couple of them. So there is some, I think we mentioned that it is restricted communication. And then this is from the view to the controller. So does anyone remember one of the restricted communication patterns that we'd seen? So this had to do with interface builder. Does anyone remember? So what view components have we had talk to controllers so far? Buttons, very good. So yeah, the button, the view recognizes that the button was selected. Somehow we have to let the controller know that something was pressed. So somehow the controller needs to be notified that something happened here. Does anyone remember the pattern that we called this? It's totally fine if not. Anyone? So we called it target action. And yeah, so the way it works is the view can talk to anything that has a target painted on it. We don't know where that target is painted on. We just know, hey, there's a target. I'm somehow connected to it. So I was pressed. I'm going to shoot my little arrow at that target, and then the controller knows that something has happened. So target action. The view knows nothing about the controller. It just knows that somewhere there's a target that I can respond to. And then, yeah, so if the controller wants to talk back to the view, we don't have to jump through any hoops. We can just say, hey, view, update this label, and then we're all good. So yeah, another restricted communication pattern is delegation. And we'll cover this one. Again, there's a way that the view knows as little as possible about the controller, and we can still talk to it. How many different things can the button, if the button wants to let the controller know that something happened? So far, how many different ways of letting the controller know that something has happened have we had with target action? So we've painted one target there. So there was only one way. So the button was clicked. We could only communicate this one thing to our controller, right? So target action, there's one action, and then there's one target that we're talking to. So there's one thing that we can communicate there. We can paint more targets. and define different actions. But so the idea is one thing happens, and then we let our controller know that there's this one thing that happened. Delegation allows us to have a little bit more fine-grained control about the thing that happened. So we can even pass back some data. We can. I think is anyone. Does it annoy anyone that the class outside is a little bit loud? If not, we can leave it open. Is anyone bothered by it? No. Okay, good. Yeah. So with delegation, we can have a whole host of things that we can communicate back to the controller. Not just, hey, something happened, but this very specific happened with these specific conditions. Okay, so any questions here? Great. So let's come up with a couple of examples here. Well, let's work one example, and then we'll go back to our tip view controller here. So let's say we have a bakery. And when so let's say we're starting this bakery, and we don't have a lot of funding, so we had to buy all this equipment, we have to pay rent. So we're trying to do this as cheaply as possible. So bakers, as I've heard, I've never been a baker, but I've heard that they have to get up really early to make the dough, and then they have to bake bread, and then make sure that it's available for people in the morning. And so it's just a really long day. So our bakery is really successful, and our day is just not long enough anymore. So what would you guys do if you have this really successful business, it's going really well? How could you maybe serve more people with your beautiful bread? What could you do? Get an employee, yes, okay. So, and let's say we have this really amazing, so we have all these really fantastic recipes, and we don't really want to share all of them. So we want to kind of just let them know as little as they need to know to do their job. So maybe for now, we feel really guarded with this whole situation. So we're going to hire someone to make the dough for us in the morning, and then we'll do all of the other things still, so that whoever we're hiring, they can't just open up their own bakery and steal our amazing bread recipe. I guess if they're making the dough, they know something about it. But yeah, so we're gonna hire someone to just make our bread. So if I have a task and I want to give that task to someone, there's a word that we can use for that is part of this this pattern here. We can delegate a task. So if I want to make bread, I don't want to make the dough, I can delegate the task of making the dough. Has everyone heard the word to delegate a task before? Okay. So let's say we hire. So we want someone to bake to make our dough. So let's call that person maybe our dough maker. We have our dough maker, and then so we are maybe the head baker. Okay. So the head baker, so the baker delegates to the dough maker. Okay, so I apologize. We're going to go into a little bit of English sentence construction. The word delegate in this circumstance. What kind of a word is that? Yeah, very good. A verb. So in this case, the baker delegates this task. The reason we're going through this is the very confusing thing in the English language is there's a verb and a noun that are spelled the same way, mean something different. They're kind of opposites even. And so yeah, they're spelled the same way, they're pronounced differently. I find it very confusing. So yeah, the baker delegates to the dough maker. So here this is a verb. So if you are now the dough maker, if you want to refer to the person who just gave you this task, who delegated the task to you, have you heard of a noun that sounds very similar that would describe the baker? So if you want to communicate back to them, what is the baker to you? And if this doesn't make sense, don't worry about it. But so yeah, if someone gave you a task, do you guys have a word for what this person could be called? The person that gave you a task. Delegator, yeah, and also delegate. So delegator, delegate, very good, delegator. I actually wish in this pattern it was called delegator, because that would make it so much clearer. But yeah, so the dough maker has a delegate. So to delegate and having a delegate sounds slightly different, but to delegate and having a delegate, those words are they're the same, but one is a noun and one is a verb. So this causes a lot of confusion, in my opinion, for this particular pattern. So let's, just so that we can get these words correct, and I'm mainly, so I think I can with certainty say, even if it seems clear right now, there's a pretty high chance that you will get confused a little bit later. And yeah, for that reason, I think the naming here is just terrible. Okay, so let's maybe, I'll come up with one other example, and then maybe you guys can spend a little bit of time coming up with another example, just so that we work these words for a second here, because if we don't have them, if we don't know exactly what each does, it'll be it'll be harder. So let's say it'll be very similar, because to delegate a task, you're always going to have someone who knows a lot more about something, and they break up the task. They break up the tasks, and then they give a job to someone else. So it's going to look very similar. So let's say we have a gardener, and then so they want to hire someone to plant the carrots. So the gardener hires a carrot planter. So what do they do? So the carrot planter is supposed to plant some carrots. What does the gardener do with the carrot planter? How could we describe what the gardener is doing here? Assign a task, and then let's try to use the D words here. So again, I wish it was assign, or but yes, sadly it's delegate. But yeah, so how would you say the gardener does something to assign the task? How could we use it? One of the words that we have here. Very good. Thank you. Yes. And then so we have the carrot planter and we have the gardener. Which of the two has a delegate? The carrot grower has a delegate. And which of the two delegates a task? The gardener, yes. Okay, very good. So yeah, confusing naming. So just, I know it's a little silly, but let's maybe spend like 30 seconds. You guys can come up with another example in your head. We don't have to share, but if you want to share it, we can afterwards. But yeah, let's just take 30 seconds, think of some other example, and just go through the words, just so that it ruminates that these are words that are very similar. Oh, okay. Yeah, just come up with another example where there's someone who has a task for someone else, and think about the act of assigning this task and then having someone who you talk back to. And so, yeah, once you have this, keep this example in your head. we're gonna add something to this in a second here. Okay, everyone have an example? Again, you don't have to share, but does everyone have an example? Okay, does anyone want to share? Again, you don't have to. If you're very proud of your example, yeah. Oh, very good, yeah. And so what would they do to make their job easier? Very good, yeah. And so let's pick the sound design person and the movie director. Which of the two would have a delegate? So the movie director would delegate. Which one of the two would have a delegate? The sound designer would have a delegate. Yes, very good. Okay, so let's go back with. So yeah, anyone else want to share? You don't have to. Good. Okay. So let's go back to our baker and our dough maker. So one thing that's nice with having, so the baker would have very clear instructions for how to make the dough, and then the dough maker could go ahead and make the dough, and then let the baker know. So now that we've broken up this task, we could hire a bunch of dough makers, and then we could make this task really easy for us. Like we have lots of people who are making our dough for us, and maybe me as the head baker, maybe I have to go on vacation, but so as long as there's a relationship, the person who's making the dough is going to come back with the dough at some point and give it to someone. So as long as there's a baker, it doesn't really matter who that is. So the dough maker might know very little about the baker. So maybe they just know they have a white hat, and so when the dough maker is done, they just look for the person with a white hat, and then they can deliver the dough. So here we have a product that is done here. So that when the dough maker is done, they can say, "Hey, delegate, I made this dough. Hey, baker, I made this dough here. Here's the dough." So same with the maybe not with the carrot planter, but maybe now we hire someone who does the harvesting for us. So now we delegate the task of harvesting, and then we say, "Hey, so delegate. Hey, you person who is harvesting, harvest everything that's orange, and then when you're done, put it in this basket that I'm holding here, and then I know that I'm getting the thing that I want here." All right. Any questions here? Okay, so let's go back to our tip calculator here. And we'll spend a couple minutes here just to re-familiarize with ourselves what we've done here. And then once we've done that, we're going to try to figure out the relationship between each of the components here. So we have two screens here. Let's go back to our interface builder here. So we have two screens. One we called calculation view controller. It's also up here. So this is our calculation view controller. And then we created a change tip view controller. So let's write those two down here. Where's my iPad? Nope. I hit it. So yeah, we have, can't do that. We have a calculation view controller. And then we have a change tip view controller. Okay. So yeah, again, our calculation view controller, we have the amount that we're putting in there. We have the calculate button, and then when they hit that, we calculate the amount that we want to tip. And then here we have this other button where we said, hey, if you press this button, show this change tip view controller, and then here we can type in a tip and then hopefully click button. I guess we should change that here. Let's maybe say apply or something like that. Or yeah, apply maybe. So when we're adding, maybe it was 15%, now we change it to 20%, we're hitting apply, and then it updates over here. Okay, so we have the calculation view controller and the change tip view controller. Which one of the two is delegating a task? So who does the delegating in this case, and what do they delegate? The change tip view controller. So delegates. And what does it delegate? We haven't talked about it yet, so you can put it in your own words. And also doesn't have to be you. So yeah, so we have the calculation view controller. There's going to be some communication with the change tip view controller. What are we, from just the words and from what we've seen here, what are we delegating? What task are we delegating? Yeah, get updated tip percent. Okay, so we could have crammed that onto this screen here. We could have had another text field. User could have typed something in there. So we could have had it on there, but we decided, actually let's have this task be done somewhere else. So we're going to delegate to another view controller. Okay, so the calculation view controller delegates to the tip view controller. Which of the two now has a delegate? So again, this is the noun. Which of the two has a delegate? Change tip view controller, yes. So this one has delegate, and it's delegate property. And maybe, so maybe the verb for all of these, I'm going to underline in yellow. So here as well, we're delegating, and then the other one, the noun, maybe I'll do in pink. So this one has a delegate. So the dough maker has a delegate, the change tip view controller has a delegate, and we're delegating to the change tip view controller here. Okay, so now we're changing the tip, or the user is changing the tip. So what do we have to do? So we have to, who do we report to? So we're inside the change tip view controller. Who do we let know that the tip has changed to whatever percentage? We're letting know our delegate. Yes, exactly. Who is our delegate? The calculation view controller. Okay. So the change tip view controller has a delegate, and the delegate is the calculation view controller. Okay. Does this make sense so far? Okay. So here, so we could say the delegate is the calculation view controller. So if we're saying our delegate should know as little as possible, the person we're delegating to should know as little as possible about the delegate, the person who's giving the task. So the task taker should know as little as possible about the task giver. So our view should know as little as possible about our view controller. Then if the change tip view controller knows everything about the calculation view controller, knows that it's a calculation view controller, then we are back in the situation where the view would be able to talk to the view controller without restriction, and the view controller can talk to the view without restriction. So somehow we have to make sure that the delegate, that we're only knowing as little as possible about our delegate. And we'll go back and update this here in a second. So let's implement this. Any questions here so far? Okay. All right. So we have to do a couple of other things to make this communication work here. So let's see how we actually let's run this, and then let's see what we've done here, how we've set this up. Well, I guess while it's building, we can talk about how it's set up. So initially, what we had done, we had just control dragged. We had control dragged our button to our change tip view controller, and that created a segue. So a segue was a transition from one screen to another, and then another student had a question: how could we transition with some logic attached? So maybe we wanted to make sure that the person is logged in. So what we've done here now is we control dragged from the view controller in general to our change tip view controller, and we created this general segue. So somehow from here we can transition to here. We named the segue, so we called it show change tip segue, and then the way that we actually performing the segue is our button has this target now where we're performing the segue. Does that make are you guys remembering from last week? So I would say even let's make it a little bit simpler. I'm gonna redo the connecting of the two components, and we're gonna go back to we could do it this way too. I just want to make it as simple as possible so that we're only seeing the things that are necessary. And so maybe I'll keep this one here. So I'll keep this one here, and then we can still use it later. We're now just gonna remove remove this this action here. So if we want to remove an action from a button, so that's maybe another thing that would be interesting. Am I actually pressing the button? Yeah. Okay. So we have an action from this button to our view controller. So let's bring up the view controller here, and let's maybe. So if I'm hovering over here, we had control dragged an action to our code. Let me just make sure we have as much space here as possible. So we had control dragged this button, created this action. If I'm hovering here, we see where it's connected. If I just delete this, we saw this, I think, in our first lecture. If you're pressing this button, the app will crash because the connection is still there. So how do we sever this connection? We bring up our right side menu here. We select this view component, and on the very right side here, we have connections. So these are all our connections that we have. So here, I can sever this connection, and then the connection here is now gone. So we could reconnect it. If I control drag here, it's connected again, and then I can sever it like this. So I'm just going to leave this here, but comment it out so that you guys know that's there, and maybe I'll move it to the bottom, just so that we have. Actually, you guys have this in the previous. I uploaded this to Canvas. We have it there. So, okay, this behavior is different from the last operating system. Okay, all right. So we can also remove the segue again. So the simplest way to connect the two view controllers was to control drag this button and create this segue by control dragging and letting go. And now we have the segue. When we're pressing the button, we're transitioning to this view controller. So let's build here real quick. So if I'm pressing the % button here, we're going to the screen. If I'm going back, we're going back to the screen. So this is the same behavior that we had last week, and we changed it slightly. I just want to make sure that since we're covering something that can get confusing, that we only have the minimum stuff that we actually need, so that we see what's going on. Okay, so somehow now we have to set up the connections between the calculation view controller and the change tip view controller. So how do we do this? How do we delegate our task to the change tip view controller? So there's a method that gets called whenever a segue is performed, and I think I briefly mentioned this last week. So whenever one of these connections gets triggered, so I'm pressing this button, a segue is performed. We're going from this screen to this screen. There's a function on our parent view controller, that gets called, that we can override. So it exists, it already gets called, we're inheriting from UI view controller, and this method gets called. If you forget method names, you can just command click, go to the view controller, and then here's now all of the methods, all of the properties on the view controller are listed. We're looking for something did perform segue. So that perform. Not this one, perform segue, that's the one that we saw. So, okay, wait. Let's just search for segue. Where is it? Oh, sorry, prepare for segue. So this is the one that we're looking for. So this is called as we are going from one screen to another. So we're preparing for this transition. We're preparing to go from one screen to another. So this function is on UI view controller. So this is on our class that we are inheriting from. So we're inheriting from UI view controller. Our calculation view controller inherits from UI view controller. So we have a function here. So prepare for. Okay, so I think my computer is a little bit unhappy with code completing. Normally code completes just to prevent copy-paste mistakes. I'll just copy-paste. So if I'm implementing this method already exists on UI view controller, so we have to add the override keyword, just like here for the view.load. Does everyone remember inheritance and overriding properties from other classes? Okay, so let's add the override here. So again, prepare for segue gets called as we're transitioning from one screen to the next. So inside this method, we have access to both view controllers. The one that we are currently on, so obviously we have access to that one since we are inside calculation view controller, so we know all of our properties here, and we have access to the one that we're about to transition to. So we haven't transitioned yet, but we're about to transition. How do we have access to this next screen? So here, the segue is passed to us. So the UI storyboard segue is passed to us, and the segue has a destination property, and so down here we see the type. The destination property is of type UI view controller, which means, so that's the parent class, the parent type that we're going to. We are actually transitioning to a change tip view controller, but so inside this destination property, we just know about that it's a UI view controller. So if you have a parent type in another language, and you want to see if it's a specific type, what can you do in another language to see if you actually have that specific type that you're interested in? Does that question make sense? So we have, so this is our destination. So our destination is of type UI view controller. We know that our destination is change type view controller, which inherits from UI view controller. In other languages, how can you, if you have a parent type, how can you turn that parent type into another type, into a more specific type? Have you guys done this in other languages? So you have a generic, you have a base type, and that maybe you have an array of posts, and then you inherit it from post to create image. So maybe you have a feed of people are posting to a feed, and then you have, your parent class is feed post, and then maybe in this array could be image posts or text posts or friend request posts. So these are all specific types that are inheriting from feed post. So if you have this array of feed posts, how could you then talk to the specific type that you have there? Have you guys done this in other languages? Have you guys heard the word casting before? Yeah, okay, casting. So you can cast a parent type you can try to cast it to a specific type, or you can say, hey, the specific type, I want to cast it to a parent type. Who has heard casting before? Okay, so most people, very good. All right, so we have our destination. We know that it is a UI view controller. We are hoping that it is of type change tip view controller. So we are hoping that it is of change tip view controller. So how can we cast in Swift? We can say destination as this other thing. When you're casting from something that is a base type to a more specific type, what could happen? So we're casting from the very base UI view controller to a very specific type that we implemented, change tip view controller. What could happen in this operation? What if the segue went to another view controller? Then the destination would be of a different type, right? So it would still be of a UI view controller, but we wouldn't be able to cast to this view controller. Does that make sense? Okay, if it doesn't make sense, let's add another view controller here. So let's add another view controller. Okay, we'll have to create another file here real quick. We'll call it, we'll create a blue view controller maybe. Blue, all it has is a blue background. So let's import UIKit, and let's implement our blue view controller. There we go. Okay, so let's change its color. So we can change the color of a view the view's color of a view controller when the view has loaded. So we're going to override view did load, and we're going to say, hey, my view that I have, I want the background color to be blue, not black, blue. All right, so we have a blue view controller. Let's go back to our main screen here, and then we have to say this one should be the blue view controller. So I'm selecting the view controller icon, and I'm saying here in the center button, this should be the blue view controller. Okay, so it won't update the color here. This is a runtime thing. So once the view has loaded, the background color will change here. All right, so let's make sure this view controller is actually blue. I showed you guys last week this little entry arrow. If I drag that one to our blue view controller, let's drag that, our app will launch into this screen. So let's make sure that it's blue. Oh, something. Sorry. All right, so we should see a blue screen. Okay, so we have a blue view controller, very good. Let's bring this back to our entry point here, and now we're going to add another button. So all this button does is it goes to the blue view controller. So let's add another button. Let's do a blue button here, and let's maybe say go to blue. And I'm going to connect this screen with a segue. I say show, and so now our calculation view controller can go to 2 screens. Does that make sense? So I'll boot it real quick here, and we can either go to our change tip view controller here. So now we are in our change tip view controller, or we can go to our go to blue view controller. And then now I can't find the breadcrumb because it's also blue. Okay, so we have 2 destinations that this view controller can go to. Our change tip view controller and our blue view controller. Does that make sense so far? Okay. Any questions here? So let's go back to our calculation view controller. So this is our initial view controller that we are navigating from. And what did I say? When does this function get called? When does prepare for segue get called? Does anyone remember? What was a segue? What was a segue? A transition from? Very good. And then when does prepare for segue get called?
Right before you do the transition then?
Very good, yes. And then what was special about this function? So who do we have access to in this function?
Whichever view you transition to the original view has access to all the properties in the view you're about to segue to.
Yes, very good. Okay, so let's take a look at that. So we are going to, so we'll not do the casting yet. So let's, I'm just going to print to the console our destination here. And then down here we'll see who we're navigating to. Okay, so now I'm going to print go to blue. And so this is the tip calculation, this is the blue view controller. So this is the name of our app. And then we have blue view controller. So the destination was of type blue view controller. It inherits from UI view controller, but this is the actual instance that we navigated to. So if I go to tip, calculate tip view controller, the destination is this view controller. The destination is of type UI view controller, but so that's just the type of the destination. So the actual type of the destination that we're going to is either one of these 2. Does that make sense so far? Any questions here? So inside this function, no matter where we're going to, there will be a destination of type UI view controller, but depending on which view controller we go to, we have the actual instance of this view controller there, so we have access to that. Why is this maybe necessary? Why would we want to have access to this other view controller? So let's go back to our app here, and so when I'm changing the tip percentage, I probably want to pre-populate this with the tip that we already have, right? So it might be nice to be able to see this. So to be able to do that, let's pass the tip percentage to our change tip view controller. So that we're going to pass some other things here in a second, but that's the first thing that we want to pass. So our change tip view controller should have, it'll have to be a variable. It should have a current tip property. So our tip here is of type double, so we want that. And then so now we have to decide what the type do we want to give it a default value. I'm not a huge fan of this because then we we're assuming that there's a value here, even if there's not. Maybe someone didn't select 0. So what could we do if we want this current tip to be either nothing or a double? Who remembers? We talked about this last week. So we introduced this concept that things could either, that there's a special kind of variable that can hold a thing or it can hold nothing. Optionals. So let's turn this into an optional. And then, we can set this in our prepare for segue here. All right, so change tip view controller has a current tip property. Blue view controller does not. So if I try to set on my destination current tip, why does that not? Here, let's do that, tip. Okay, so we have our tip up here. And what do we have? We have a compile time error. So value of type UI view controller has no member current tip. Why is that? Why does our destination not have a current tip property? Yeah, blue view doesn't have it. Our UI view controller that we're inheriting from doesn't have it, right? So to be able to set the current tip here, we have to make sure that we're talking to a change tip view controller. Does that make sense so far? So we have to cast our destination view controller type to a change tip view controller. We have to make sure that we're talking to the right thing. So let's try that. So let's try to cast our destination as a change tip view controller. And then we just saw that our destination could be something else too, right? So it could be blue view controller in this example, or it could be change tip view controller. So what could happen as we're trying to cast the destination? So what could happen? So if we're navigating to the blue view controller, what is going to happen with this thing that we're trying to do here? Is it going to succeed or fail? Fail. Because our destination, if we're navigating to the blue view controller, is not of type change tip view controller, right? So casting is very similar to turning. So what we've seen before is we had a string that could hold a double, and we said, hey, we want to turn this double, we want to turn the string into a double. You guys remember that? That's where we first saw optionals. So we did something that was a dangerous operation. There was a string. We're trying to turn it into something that, sort of this giant set of all possible strings. We're trying to turn it into something that is of the set of all the strings that can contain valid integer doubles. So we're going from a much larger set to a much smaller set. So same thing here. We're going from all view controllers to a set of one. We want just the change tip view controller. So this could fail, right? So casting from UI view controller to change tip view controller could fail. So what might be the result of this operation? So if it can fail, what should be the result? What should be the resulting type of destination? We need an optional. Very good. So this is going to be an optional change tip view controller. So, and again, optionals we create by adding the question mark. So, all right, and then so the other thing, we just have to add one little bit of syntax here. We have to. There is a way that you can cast one thing from another, but only if their sets are equivalent. So, if two things are truly the same, you can say as like this. If they're not truly the same, we have to add this question mark behind it. So what we're doing now is we're taking a UI view controller. We're going to check, can I turn this into a change tip view controller? Can I cast it from the parent that we're potentially inheriting from to change tip view controller? If this is possible, we'll have destination be an instance of change tip view controller. If it's not possible, then we have null. Does that make sense so far? Okay. So we have to make sure that the destination is actually of this change tip view controller. The compiler makes us check. So the result of this, so even if I remove the type here, the result of this casting operation is, so if I option click destination, the result is an optional. So when we're casting from one type, from a parent type to a child type, or from a more broad type to a more narrow type, we're gonna be dealing with optionals. Okay, how do we unwrap our optionals? We've seen that last week. And 2 weeks ago, how do we make sure that we actually now have something here? What did we use when we wanted to do math with our optional doubles? Unwrap it, how do we do it? If, so the if let, right? So let's do that, if let, and then inside here, so inside our scope that we have here, we now have, so if I option click on destination, the optionality is gone. Any questions here? Does that make sense? So our destination might or might not be our change tip view controller. We saw that if we're going to the blue view controller, it's definitely not something that has a tip property. So we have to go from destination to be able to set something at that destination. We have to make sure, hey, are you this thing? And then if the question is, if the answer is yes, then we can do some stuff there. Okay. Any questions here? Yeah?
Should we use a guard?
We can use a guard. Yeah, very good. I like a guard here, since we only have this one thing here. Actually, so we'll do that in a second. Let's add another if let here, because we have the blue view controller, and let's cast that one to the blue view controller here. And then so this one doesn't have a current tip, right? So we're gonna get a compile time error here. Very good. So here we'll just print to the console blue view controller. And then here maybe we'll say tip is formatted %. Okay, all right, let's test this out. So as we're preparing for our segue, our destination is either change tip view controller in our app or this blue view controller we added to demonstrate our point. So let's see what happens. All right, so I'm going to click here. Our console printed this. I'm going to click here. Our console printed this. So when we have a change tip view controller, this code block is executed. Otherwise, this one gets executed. Does this make sense? Good. So, but I liked your suggestion. We're only going to navigate to one thing, actually. So let's add the guard statement here. So that means when it's not successful, we'll return here. And then let's maybe be a little bit more specific here. Let's call this our change tip view controller. And then we don't actually need this. Okay, so we now have a way to pass data to our next screen here in our prepare for segue method. So let's see what we can do with this now. So we have our change tip view controller has this text field, right? So we could add maybe this initial text, this initial tip to our to our text field. So to be able to do that, we need to be able to access this view component here. How do we access this view component inside our change tip view controller? Control drag, and what are we creating? An outlet, right? So tip text field, maybe like this. Okay. So now we have our tip text field, and we can now set the text sorry, So we're dealing with an optional right now. So let's unwrap. I don't think we've seen this yet. So if we have an optional property here and we want to make sure that it exists, we can just say guard this thing is not an optional, and now from here on we have that that unwrapped property. So this replaces this, which looks a little funny. Guard let current tip equal current tip. That looks a little redundant. This is what one had to do just a couple of years ago, or maybe you would have created a slightly different name for this unwrapped value. So I very much like that we can now just do this. All right, so we're going to have some weird formatting here. Because we so we have our change tip. We now have 0.2. So let's maybe multiply by 100. So if we do the dot format, we would have the percent sign there as well, which we would have to strip. So yeah, very good point. Yeah, I'd say for now we'll just leave it this way, and then just to. But yeah, so I did tell you specifically to always use format. So, but yeah, so now we have a way to pass the tip from here to here, and I guess we can also, in a second we'll also update. We'll set the tip here, but yeah, so we have a way to pass something to a new view controller. Does that make sense so far? Yeah. Well, good question. Let's take a look at what it does. So we now have the percent sign there. I guess we could strip it, but so if I'm now typing something in, we would have to delete the percent sign. So, yeah. There's probably a formatted here that we could use. I just didn't, let's see. Number. And interesting. Yeah, there's a rounded. Here, maybe let's do this. Yeah. I didn't prepare this, so let's just do this for now. But yeah, very good point. I told you not to use it. So, yeah. All right. Okay, so we have a way to send something to our change tip view controller. So here is a pitfall, and then we'll do a break here. So I'll show you something that you might be tempted to do. We'll just wrap up. We'll make sure that we understand what we've done here, and then we'll do a break. So you might be tempted. So now we have this tip text field here, right? So when I'm clicking on this button, I could just set the tip straight here, right? I could. Why do I have to go through this hoop here and set it in viewed load? Did anyone think this? I wouldn't fault you for, and that would be my first thought here. I want to set the current tip on our, I want to set the value of this text field. Let's see what happens if we're trying to directly set it. So I'm going to undo the viewed load here. And now I'm going to try to set the tip text field value directly. So this still compiles what we've done here. And we can go to this screen. We're not setting anything right now. So what if I set the text field directly? Does that make sense? So we have this tip text field. What if I set the text value directly? So let's try it. So instead of setting the current tip property, let's say change it to tip text field. There it is, very good. Text, okay, very good. So now I should be able to do, what did we have? We had tip times 100. That's what we had, I think. Very good, thank you. Okay, let's see what happens. Okay, our app crashed, which might be very unexpected. So what happened? Let's give ourselves the most space possible here. So when did I say this prepare for segue exists? So we're going from our tip calculation view controller to this new screen. When does this function get called? Right before the transition. So the thing that that is not possible for you guys to know without without hearing about this. At this point, the view controller exists, but its view has not been loaded. So all of the properties on there, all of the view properties, they don't exist yet. So the view controller, the instance exists, but when we're going to so the view controller file exists, but all of the view properties on here don't exist yet. So the view has not been loaded yet. So prepare for segue gets called before the view actually gets loaded. So why does this crash? Our tip text field here has a type, UI text field exclamation point. What does the exclamation point mean? We haven't covered it yet. So I can change it to a question mark without any errors popping up here. When I go back to our calculation view controller and I try to build, we're going to see we now have a compile time error, right? So before we had a runtime error, now we have a compile time error. So I changed this from an exclamation point to a question mark. And what does the compile time error say to us here? So 1 second, I think this is a little bit easier to see. Value of optional type UI text field must be unwrapped to refer to its text property here. So what we can infer from that is, so tip text field is an optional, and it gets set once the view has loaded. So until the view has loaded, this is nil. So when view.load gets called, right before that, all of these properties were created. So I'm actually very frustrated with Interface Builder for adding these for adding these exclamation points. The exclamation point means that we're still working with an optional, but we're saying, trust me, I checked. If we are referring to this type, it says it disables all of the compiler features that force us to check that we have an optional here, and the app crashes. So you can change these to be optionals, and now the compiler will help you make sure that we're not making this mistake. So prepare for segue gets called before the view of our destination gets loaded. That means tip text field is still nil at this point. So let's see if we can unwrap it. I'll just do this. So let's see if we can unwrap it. Okay, so let's see what happens. Okay, so it didn't set the property, or it didn't set the value here. So I'm trying to set text fields text to the string here, but it does not. Hopefully that makes sense. We traded the runtime crash for a compile time error. So we're now checking, but where do we exit? So if the text field is nil by the time this function gets called, we never go here, right? Does that make sense? So we traded the compile time error for a runtime error. Sorry, we traded the runtime error for compile time error. We're now checking, but let's add some print statements to see where we're exiting. Text field was nil, and then here we'll do destination not change tip. Okay. All right, let's see if we can trigger both of these. How can we trigger this one? How can we trigger this one? Let's go to blue. Let's see if we trigger that one. Very good. Destination was not tip view controller. Let's see if we can trigger the other one. Text field was nil. Okay. So because this function gets called before the view of the destination gets loaded, all of the view elements don't exist yet. Does that make sense? Okay. So we can't populate properties on our view elements directly. So that's why we set a property on our change tip view controller, and then when the view has loaded, so view.load gets called as the view is loaded, and now we can change our property. Does that make sense? Okay. So when we're transitioning to a new screen with prepare for segue, be aware that the view doesn't exist until view.load gets called. It doesn't exist yet in prepare for segue. So this one. So the view controller exists already. So this is a property on our view control so we're inheriting from your view controller, and then view.load. So this property here has to load. So if we go back to our view controller here, so this is the view controller that we're talking about. So the view controller is represented by this bar up here. So that's the code. So the code that we have here, those are the view controllers. This is represented by the view property. So this property has not loaded yet at this point.
More or less, I'm just curious if you do it, because we were trying to change something that was part of the view, right? The tip text field.
Yes.
But that wouldn't really apply. Would that apply for the current tip if I want to do something funny with current tip before the view is loaded?
Before the view is loaded, yes.
Yeah, I can still do whatever I want.
Yeah? Okay, very good question. We have a thing that we can call before view.load gets called. So view.load is called a lifecycle method. So view.load gets called once when the view was loaded. There's another function called view will appear, and it's not auto-completing. Okay, so we should have access to current tip. Let's just double it. So let's do so this should double it before the view gets loaded. Let me make sure that I have that right. Actually view will appear gets called after view.load. Let's see. Is there another one there? Okay, so view.load gets called first. Okay, so then there might not be a way that I can think of right now. One other thing you can do is once you've set this property, you can trigger something. So this gets called as we're manipulating this thing. So maybe so let's prove that this very good. Thank you so much. We're going to prove that this gets called before the view gets loaded when we're setting it in prepare for segue. So when we're setting our current tip, we're going to execute whatever is happening here. So setting current tip to okay, and then so let's print when the view was loaded. View did load. Tip is. We'll just do the same thing here. All right. So we'll see that this one will trigger this one, which is before the view will load. So setting current tip to 0.2, view did load, tip is 0.2. Okay. So yeah, just something to keep in mind. Prepare for segue. The view of the destination has not loaded yet. All right. Yeah, question. Oh, sorry. Yeah, lifecycle methods. So in the lifecycle of the view, so we have the view loads, and then the view will appear, the view will disappear. So those are all kind of lifecycle methods of the view. And this is one of the lifecycle methods. So there's also here. Let's go to the other ones. Here, view will appear. View will disappear. So this one gets called whenever the view appears. So after view did load, but whenever the view appears. So if I'm backgrounding the app, this method gets called. If I'm backgrounding the app and I'm opening it again, this will get called. If I'm backgrounding the app, this one gets called. This one will only get called once. These ones get called whenever we're doing these actions. All right. So I promised a break. So yeah, question? No, perfect. Oh, we'll cover that much later. So nothing is asynchronous right now. So don't worry about it yet. We will cover it. Very good question. All right, let's do a break. Let's come back at, let's do 10 minutes. I'll come back at 8:35. A way to pass something to our next screen. I think just to make things simpler, I'm going to remove these additional print statements here. I think it made sense. Hopefully it made sense. I just wanted to show you guys we don't have access to view properties yet when prepare for segue is called. So when prepare for segue is called, view controller properties are accessible to us, but not things on the view. So we have to go through this dance of doing things after view did load. So this is a pretty common pattern in UIKit. You often see a lot of the initial work that people want to do when a view controller happens after the view has loaded. All right. So we can set some data. We can talk to our target, our destination view controller. How do we send something back? So we started talking about delegation. So if we're thinking about delegating the task of producing a new tip output to this change tip view controller, how can this change tip view controller talk back to its delegate? So if we go back to our iPad here, so the change tip view controller will have a delegate property, right? So we're giving them the job of doing this thing, so we need to be able to talk back to the person who gave us this job. So let's start with that. Let's create a delegate property on our change tip view controller. So we were given a job. We want to be able to talk to our delegate. So some of the things we're doing right now, they're going to change, and we'll talk about why. So let's create a delegate. What type should this delegate be? So we need to be able to talk back to whoever gave us this job. right now, we don't really have any other way to describe that as with its very specific type, right? So we're talking back to our calculation view controller, right? So that is going to be the type for now. Okay, so just like with the current tip, we're not going to have that when the view controller gets created, but we're going to have access to that in prepare for segue, so it'll have to be an optional. So now we have a way to communicate with our delegate. So we have a property to our calculation view controller, so we should be able to talk back to it. What might we want to tell our delegate? So the user's going to type. We're going to have our apply button. What would we want to tell our delegate when we hit apply? What's in this field? Okay, very good. So let's do that first. Let's hook up this apply button, and then let's see how we can make that happen. So let's bring our change tip view controller up here. We have our apply button. How do we have the apply button talk to its view controller? And what are we creating? So an outlet is a property. What was the thing we're creating for an action? So buttons talk through actions. Okay, so apply button pressed, and then I'll just make sure that we have our button there. Not necessary, but so let's connect. All right. So user types something in. They're gonna hit apply. So what do we do now? You had it pretty much already. So we want to tell our delegate what? Delegate. So maybe we can say tip changed to, and then we provide a value, right? So maybe we would be able to say something like this. Tip changed to, and then I'm just going to put a double here right now. We'll do that in a second. So maybe the user typed 0.1. Obviously they didn't yet, but so we want to be able to pass that value back. Okay, so this is what we want to be able to tell our delegate. So let's provide, let's create that function on our tip view controller here. So tip changed to new tip. Okay, and then what do we want to do here? So what should the tip, the calculation view controller do once the tip has changed from its, so it delegated this task, it was now notified that a new value is there. What should we do here? Okay, let's do that. Very good. Right. All right. Let's see if we have any issues here still. So why do we have a compile time error here? Can anyone fix this for us here? Oh, yeah, so we have to check that our delegate exists, and then I think, so this is the wrong compiler message right now. Let's see. Yeah, it must be unwrapped. Okay, so I'll show you guys a new way to unwrap. So we could do this. And then we just saw we don't actually have to have this thing. So we could do this, okay? But then, so now we have 1, 2, 3, 4 lines. All right, we have it's a little bit verbose to do this. Since we don't need to do anything when delegate is nil here. So I'm gonna say, if delegate is nil, something terrible happened. I don't necessarily need to know about it. We'll catch it somewhere else. So there's a way that I can access where we can go from left to right and keep going if we haven't hit nil yet. So wouldn't it be nice if we can say, I want to talk to the delegate. If there's a delegate there, then I want to continue, and I want to communicate this message. Wouldn't that be nice if we could do that? Okay. So we can do that with just adding the question mark here. So what this now means is, if delegate is nil, stop here. We don't continue. If it is not nil, if delegate is nil, stop here. If it is not nil, we're going to continue with whatever we're doing. Does that make sense? And if there was another property here that also could be nil on this thing, then we could keep going. But if you're only interested in accessing a property on something that is an optional, this is a very good way to conditionally access methods on this thing. The downside is this will just silently fail if delegate is nil. So if we forgot to assign delegate, we won't know about it. So we won't be able to log it anywhere. We won't be able to get a notification in our console. We won't be able to tell the user anything. I mean, the user won't be able to do anything with this information because they can't set the delegate. But yeah, so right now, this will just silently fail if delegate is nil. So this is a nice way to do it. So let's see what happens here. Okay, so let's change the tip. So it'll change it to 0.1 right now. So let's hit apply. We can go back now. And let's see what happens if we calculate the tip for 100. So it's still to 20%. Why is it still 20%? So this is where this silently failed now. So let's prove that it was. Let's prove that we were nil here. So all right, let's see what happens. Okay, so I go to change tip calculator, change tip view controller. Let's hit apply. No delegate assigned. How do we solve this? How do we assign a delegate? Let's do it in prepare. Very good. So we have to communicate two things. And what should we assign delegate to? So maybe before we answer this, does this make sense to everyone? In prepare for Segway, we have access to the next screen that we're going to. The next screen needs to be able to talk back to us. So this is where we can set the delegate. Any questions there? Uh-huh. So this is just where we're communicating all of the things to our new screen. This is where we're communicating back. Does that make sense? Yeah. We'll go through it in a second. But yeah, so what do we set the delegate to? So for the change tip view controller, who is the delegate? The calculation view controller. Very good. So how do we set it to this instance of the calculation view controller? We can use self. So we're inside calculation view controller. We're assigning ourselves as the delegate, and off we go. So yeah, in prepare for Segway, we set ourselves as the delegate. Then whenever we're pressing the button, we can talk back to our delegate, which calls this method. Does that make sense? Okay, any questions here? So let's see what happens. Okay, so let's go here, apply, back, and let's type in 100, calculate. So we update it. Very good. Okay, so let's maybe clean this up real quick. I guess we don't need this anymore, right? Like, this makes sense to you guys. We've set it up once now. I think this one makes it slightly easier to see what's going on here since we have a little bit less going on. So the other thing we need to do though is we have to read from our text field, right? So we have to actually read the value that the user typed in. What's the type of what the user is going to be typing in? String, very good. And then, so we have to do something with it. What do we have to do to the string? Very good, okay. So we did a lot of that here. So first we have to make sure that this text field exists. So yeah, this was one of the, oh, I guess the text could also be null. Yeah, okay. All right, so let's do that. Let's do all of the unwrapping. So let's guard against the case where text field is null. Okay, and then I'm just going to add little print statements here so that you guys can follow the logic. So no text field assigned. This should be impossible. At least, so we're working with interface builder. Interface builder will have put something there by the time that we're able to click something. So this exists by the time we're able to click a button because view will load will have been called because we're interacting with a view. Does that make sense? So unless we are severing this connection manually, this will be not null. So yeah, the only way that I could cause that to be null is by going to the so here we have text field. If I were to go here and sever this connection, that's the only way that this would be null. So this should never be called. This should never be null. Okay, so we now have our text field. Oh, tip text field. There we go. Tip text field has a text property which is of type optional string. So let's unwrap that. Tip string and then I'll add a little print statement here. Oh. Text field text was nil. This also should be impossible. I'm unable to have text be nil. I have not been able to create any situation where this is possible. All right, so we now have a string, new tip, double text string, and then so the user will type this as a %. So we'll have to divide this by 100 because we're saving it as a value that is that doesn't have the 100 multiplied by it. Okay, so how could this fail? Very good. Tip entered was not a number. Okay. So these two you can easily, I would probably combine. I guess, so you've seen this. This is the nice thing about the guard statement. We can do all of these statements one after the other, and then our happy path through the function is not indented. So we don't have to be 3 indentations deep. So one really easy way to combine these would be so a tips text field could be nil, so we can use that thing again, and then I mentioned that both of these I'm not able to really create by myself, so we could even combine these two into one guard statement just to make it a little bit more compact. and this is probably the most compact that you could write this in a safe way. And then, yeah, so you still have the ability to let the user know something happened. So we don't have an outlet here for a label, but you could add that here. All right, so let's see if that works. So let's type in 100. Let's calculate. So that's 20. Let's change it to 50%. Apply. Go back. Calculate again, and we get $50 for 50%. Okay. Any questions here? Ah, okay. Yes, we can do that. So the trade-off is we won't have. So there's a very good question. I'll show a way to potentially lock it, but so it's also not foolproof. So let's go to our tip text field, and so in view.load, we can set up our view components. So we can go tip text field, and then the attribute we're looking for is keyboard type, and we can set that to number pad. So to do that, so I am still able to enter whatever with my keyboard, because this is the equivalent thing of the iPhone being connected to a Bluetooth keyboard. Very unlikely that someone will be. I think I showed you this last time. You can toggle the software keyboard. So the software keyboard now,